if you ever had a situation where you had this business transaction and you were all elated about it and it actually hasn't gone through, it's just an opportunity. And you started becoming extroverted about it and, wow, this is happening. You tell everybody about it. It hasn't come through yet. It hasn't actually been closed. And then as you tell people about it and you're all elated about it, it falls apart. And then you're devastated because, oh my God, I just lost the thing I was all elated about. Also, you can have things with your finances themselves. You can be having a setback in financial markets. I've seen people gamble with various commodities or currencies or possibly leveraged options or contract for differences or whatever, and they've gone out and done incredible leverages or IPOs, and they gamble with their money, and they've had setbacks with their money. And they think, they're foolish enough to gamble without having the liquidity to gamble with. I tell people to save before you invest, before you speculate. People go out and right off the bat and speculate. And then what's the problem with that is then they think, now if it makes money, they think, oh my God, I can make money easy now. And then they're not willing to be patient to build wealth. And I'm a firm believer in being patient and strategic about building wealth. But sometimes people do that. And then when the market crashes the other direction and they thought they had all this money, they didn't know that they really didn't have what they thought they had. They had a bubble. And I tell people that the real value of a market is the mean, the average fluctuation that it goes above and below it. It's the deviation from that can mislead us. When it's above the mean, we can think we have something we don't. And when it goes below the mean, we can think we don't have something we do. And both of those false positives and false negative kind of responses can cause us great devastation psychologically, because we can actually think, oh my God, I've just lost a bunch of money that you really didn't have. So I always run my expectations based on a mean. And if it's above the mean, I don't get elated about it because I really just think of it as really the mean. And if it goes below it, I don't think as much because I'm not deviating it from the top above the mean. I'm deviating it from below the mean or from the mean. And so I don't see it as a devastation. So if you have reasonable understanding about the markets, then the ups and downs of the markets, as long as you have cash reserves and as long as you basically understand the mean, the probability of having setbacks in that area is less. But that's a combination of perception, a combination of expectation, a combination of the action steps you take. I learned a long time ago that when the market was up way above the market, that's not really what the value of that market is. I got to look at what the real mean of that market is. What's the average fluctuation? And that tells me at least a better idea of what that mean is. Doesn't give me an exact figure, but it's a better. And as a result of it, then my expectations are more reasonable. And then if all of a sudden I'm having a loss, I don't feel devastated. And I don't feel like I had a setback. I just realize it's a normal volatility. And if I don't sell that stock or whatever the market is, I haven't lost a thing. I lost if I sell it. If I didn't lose anything or didn't sell anything, it's just a fluctuation. So a lot of times people have this gamble. I had a gentleman about a year and a half ago. Yeah, it was a year and a half ago. And they bought a bunch of Bitcoins and it went into a frenzy. And they thought, oh my God, I'm going to be, a billionaire very shortly. And it went up to about 1900 for a Bitcoin. And then it dropped down to 8 and then 9 and 8 and then 7 and 6 and 5 and 4 and 3. And they had a setback, they thought. Well, the reality is that they bought it above that. And so they went to half price. And while it was up, they could handle the highs, but it went down. They were devastated by the lows. And they sold out because they couldn't handle the lows. And they gambled and they speculated. And right now it's doing the same thing. It's speculating way up above and it's climbing up again because of all the frenzy that's going around it. And that thing can go up and down. And if you don't understand what the average mean is and you don't put discretionary income in there, then you run the risk of that. So you have to learn from those experiences how to use your perceptions to say, how to use it to your greatest advantage. And you also have to stop and look at what your next action is. Are you going to keep doing the same thing, expecting different results? Are you going to finally learn to buy a quality, investment, not a speculation? Something that has true intrinsic value that you can measure by some means, and you got a probability in your favor. If you do that, then you're not setting yourself up for the setbacks. And these so-called challenges that you're facing are really opportunities for learning. But as I said earlier, that if we ask ourselves how specifically is whatever's happening in our life, helping us fulfill our values, we're automatically, because anytime we get things linked to our highest values, we have the greatest resilience. And we see things as feedback, not setbacks. Feedbacks is when you can say thank you for what's happening, and setbacks are when you can say screw you. You know, so I'm a firm believer. Now, I've had many events in my life that I thought were challenging. I had a fun thing happen many years ago. This is about 36 years ago now. I got my accountant that I hired. This is right when I first opened up my practice. My first year, I had an accountant take a $70,000 loan that I got from a bank and classify it as $70,000 worth of income. So my income, I was supposed to have paid taxes on that, but I actually borrowed it. So it's actually supposed to reduce my taxes. But he had it as an income. He put it in the wrong little file. Well, I got audited because I didn't pay my taxes. And so I had the auditor come in there, and at first I didn't know what happened. I was angry. I was frustrated. I was sitting there going, and I had this auditor from the IRS come into my office, and we went through all the paperwork and figured out what the hell was wrong. And they owed me money. They owed me $18,000, which is not a lot of money, but I was actually thinking that I was about to have to pay unnecessary money. And at the same time, once we got it all straightened out, and I fired that accountant, and I got the accountant I have today, who's been a lovely gentleman with me for all these years, 36 years. And he's very, bottom line, he knows his stuff, and he keeps me on track with that. But that was a devastating thing, I thought, a setback. But that turned out to be money in my pocket. It helped me get my financial house way more in order. It made me friends with a person from the IRS. I ended up selling them some of my products that I was selling, some audio cassette tapes in those days. They came to my talk, turned into be, they were dumbfounded that they owed me money now, which I got back based on not having to pay the next quarter. So it's quite interesting that the setback turned out to be, very stressful initially because I was ignorant. I was blinded. And I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen? And I became more aware. And every time I become more aware, I always say the more knowledge we have, the less emotional we are. And when we're less emotional, we're more focused. And we're more focused and we have more resilience. Objective data resolves subjective bias. And subjective bias is where most of our crazies are, our setbacks are. There's skewed perceptions that are imbalanced. When you're infatuated with somebody, you have a skewed subjective bias. You're blind to the downsides. When you're resentful, you're blind to the upsides. So if you have a skewed view and you're biased in your perception, you're going to add stress to your life, and you're going to end up having more setbacks and fantasies, which are the cause of some of these setbacks. Because a lot of times the setbacks are fantasies that we're comparing what's happening to that we think it should be happening. But if you ask, how's whatever's happening helping me get what I want in life, you don't have that issue. You're grateful. Anything you can't say thank you for is baggage. Anything you can say thank you for is fuel. And so going and taking the time to go through and look for both sides of an event. And what's interesting is you go and take whatever you think is happening that's terrible and devastating and find out how that serves you. Take the worst case scenario and then think, okay, the worst case scenario, how's that going to serve me? When people in the media, celebrities, for instance, they get bombarded and devastated by media coverage, and people are basically, attacking him. I'll use an example of Michael Jackson with his the children issue, or Harvey Weinstein with his sexual harassments or something. There's no doubt that those are stressful situations, primarily because you got the perception of downsides or perceptions of upsides lost or perceptions of downsides gained. But if you go in there and you find out, okay, how do we use it to our advantage? I was watching a video on Lance Armstrong, and it was a video that more recent, not while he was in the crazies, going through the removal of all his Olympic, or what do we call the bicycling contest winnings or whatever. He got all those stripped away, all his medals stripped away. And he said on the video, he says, this has been one of the greatest things that ever happened to my life. I've been set free from a distorted view about myself and a distorted view about life. and from the internal conflict of the internal lives that I've had. He says, I actually have a fresh start. I'm now grounded. I'm now focused on what I can do to be of service, onto helping other people, and less on myself. It was about myself. I had to be the number one. It was all about me. And he said that this whole event is a gift. He said, I didn't see it initially because I was devastated by it and affected my health. I said, but I look back now and I can see the blessings of it. But the only reason, if I had sought with him, or if he'd come to breakthrough on that week that all this went down, or the month that it went down, and he would have just gone through all the crazies, we could have sat him and helped him sort through and see those blessings as they went on. And by the way, when you actually see the blessings of what's going on, or the downsides of things you're infatuated and balance out the mind, things around you change. There's a quantum entangled effect that it changes around you. You know, you really can change the world around you by changing your perception of the world around you. And I've seen this over and over again. I've had people in fact, I was just in Delhi, India, just a few days ago. And I had a lady that had come to the breakthrough experience in Florida. And she's a lovely Indian woman. And she was saying that it's changed her relationship with her family, her mom. It's changed her relationship with her daughter. It's changed her relationship with her husband. I mean, it's just changed her relationship, because she says, I had expectations based on my own values. I was projecting onto the world, and I was expecting the world to live in my values. And I was creating my setbacks and my anger and my frustrations over and over again, because no one was ever living up to my expectations. And now that I've calmed that, and I'm starting to see people for who they are and expecting to live according to their own values, not my values, all the things that I thought were setbacks are actually normal behaviors. And I now see that, wow, I'm grateful because my expectation changed. A lot of setbacks are because of false expectations. You know, expectations of other people to live in your values, expectations of people to be one-sided. They're supposed to be nice, never mean, kind, never cruel. Or expectations of them to be one-sided and live in your values. Or expectations of you to be one-sided. Expectations of you to be living outside your values in somebody else's values, which happens when you're infatuated with people. Imagine this. You're having an infatuation with somebody. You're minimizing you. You're exaggerating them. You're trying to live in their values. You can't sustain it. You start resenting them because you want your life back. But now you're infatuated with them. You fear the loss of them. And if they dump you because you're the underdog, then you're devastated because you had a fantasy, but you're actually being set free to live in your own values again and get back on top of the world again and be yourself. If you're infatuated with somebody, you know that's not the person you're going to be with. That's a sign that you don't have the right person as far as a relationship, because you're blind. So if all of a sudden you balance that, you're set free from both of those, a false relationship that has been a fantasy and you living in somebody else's values, which is not sustainable. So both those setbacks are actually liberators, because you're no longer having to be in something you're not. But we set up fantasies and expectations to set ourselves up for these so-called setbacks. The same thing, we have people that, I had a guy that basically went out and did some trading and made a lot of money in a short period of time doing some trading. And then he had this expectation that will go on forever, that I'm going to make those type of returns forever. And then all of a sudden, when he didn't get those returns, in fact, those returns were eroded by a decline in the market. Then he was devastated because he had a false expectation of what he was going to generate. Prior to making that extra income and fast, he was more patient. But once he got money quick, he wasn't patient anymore. And then he was upset and angry, and he felt like he had a setback, when actually it was just a market doing its normal response. And I was quite amazed at how he couldn't see the obvious. And I pointed it out to him, and he goes, well, that makes sense now. He says, I said, that's the problem with quick money. Getting rich quick can cost you, because what happens is it can make you think that that's the way it should be, always quick. And then when it's slow and it's methodical, then you're not appreciative. And then you feel like you're having a setback because it's not as fast as you once when you had it fast. And that's why gambling can get a very high, a dopamine high, and then you can be devastated when it's not matching what you want, or you have a setback. And that's because of the high that you have and the blindness by that infatuation. So I'm a firm believer in balancing out the mind, as you hear. And I could go over cases. In my own life, I've had relationship setbacks, right? I've had a relationship where all of a sudden I was going down this pathway in the relationship, and all of a sudden the person I was with realized that they didn't want to be with a guy that was traveling all the time. And that was a bit of a setback too, because I kind of had feelings for this person, but then that's not what they wanted. And I totally understand that. But I had to get real about my expectations. It's unrealistic to expect somebody else to live in your values. And if I'm not willing to match their values to some degree, then I at least come to a mutual arrangement where we both can see how each other's values are being met. It's unrealistic. But if we can see that and balance it out, then if I can see how what she's wanting is serves me, and she can see what I'm wanting is serves her, then it's a viable relationship dynamic. But sometimes we both project our values onto each other and expect each other to live in other people's values. And those can be perceived as setbacks, but they're just perceptions. And they're nothing more than that. Socially, you can have it too. I imagine that some of the rejection that some people have, some people could have a setback because somebody that's very close to them in their social life dismissed them, discontinued interacting with them. I've seen it in business also, when all of a sudden a client that's been a good client for many years bails out on them and no longer does business with them and has an income source that came from that, and they're not prepared. I tell people in business that whatever your margins are, don't ever have one client that provides more than that margin as far as business, so you're vulnerable to that one client. And that's what had happened in this case with this one gentleman. He had about a 25% of his business was this one particular client. And then when they dumped him, his margin was 16%. So now he's, 9% in the hole because of a loss of a client. So he had to jump and reactivate a bunch of new clients to get stable again. But in the meantime, it took him 3-4 months to stabilize it. And he was setting himself up. But the reality is that's a mathematical probability you can see up in advance. So his foolishness for not thinking in advance that if he's got a one client that's more than his margin, if that client disappears, that's a vulnerable situation. So you have to make sure you're not being vulnerable out of your own ignorance and then setting yourself up for a setback. You can prevent that by diversifying your client base into nothing more than the percentage of your returns. If you do that, then you don't have this so-called setback. But what that did is it made him, over the next 3 or 4 months, made him diversify his clientele, kept it where they had to pay more up front if they were a higher client. And then the contract had it where if they bailed out on him, that they have to pay for a transition of 3 months. And then he got more courageous in what he asked and requested. And as a result of that, he was not as vulnerable. And he knew that he won't take on clients like that unless he does a deal like that to cover those costs. And that was an upgrade in his business. And he goes, I think back now that's a gift that happened. But the process, it's also preventable. We could have prevented that if we'd just known those ratios and thought those things through. So a lot of our setbacks are because we're not thinking ahead. When we're living in our highest values and we're living congruently in alignment with what we value most, we have the highest probability of living in our executive center where we're foresighting things and thinking things out and thinking off the downsides and preparing and mitigating those risks and those downsides in advance. And that's the difference between a person who's thinking from foresight versus somebody that's living from hindsight. Hindsight is learning through trial and error. Oops, God, I screwed up. I got to learn that. And then, oops, I screwed up again. And those are people who live in setbacks. The people who have foresight, prepare in advance, and think about what could go wrong and prepare for it. And they have a lot less stress. They're more balanced in their orientation. In fact, foresight implies balance, objectivity. Objectivity means balanced-minded. So if we go through and we think out what are the worst case scenarios that can occur from our goals, and we're prepared for whatever those are in advance, we're decreasing the probability of having those setbacks, and we're prepared for them. So that's the difference between setting a goal that's really an objective or setting up a fantasy that's not. And then it's going, I don't want to think about the negative and downsides. And then when they smack you, you have a setback because you were unwilling to look in advance for what those things are. But if you actually find out what they are in advance and prepare for them and look at what you could do to reduce the probability of them happening, or if they do happen, how to spin them and use them to your advantage, now you're prepared. So setbacks are feedbacks in that respect. So I'm going through the 7 areas of life here. You could also have health, as I've said. You can have a health setting. I mean, I look at my life when I was 17 years old, I nearly died. And without a doubt, that was a catalyst for meeting Paul Bragg and finding out that maybe I could overcome my learning problems, and started my journey about being a teacher. And I'd have to say that I never got to see Paul Bragg again after the 3 weeks I spent with him. I would love to have seen him. I got to meet his daughter, Patricia, and we spent many hours together. In fact, my daughter, Elena, and Patricia has had a conversation, and it's so inspiring because my daughter is now kind of helping me and taking over what I'm doing, just like Patricia did with Paul. And that's very inspiring to me. But if I would not have met Patricia if I hadn't had that set up and almost died. So that crisis turned out to be a blessing. And so I can wait and look back 50, 46 years, 47 years later and see it. That's pretty easy to see, although I've seen it really for within a short period of time I saw it. But we don't need the wisdom of the ages with the aging process. We can have the wisdom of the ages without it by asking, what's the upside or what's the downside? If you have this, if you ever had a situation where you had this business transaction and you were all elated about it and it actually hasn't gone through, it's just an opportunity. And you started becoming extroverted about it and, wow, this is happening. You tell everybody about it. It hasn't come through yet. It hasn't actually been closed. And then as you tell people about it and you're all elated about it, it falls apart. And then you're devastated because, oh my God, I just lost the thing I was all elated about. And then you had a setback. I found that if you're really elated about an opportunity, that's a sign you're not ready for it. If you have an emotion about it, that means you're not really psychologically prepared for it. When you have a balanced orientation of it, you're prepared for it. So next time when you get this opportunity, keep your mouth shut. Go and look at what are the ups and downsides. Balance out that perception so you're really prepared for all the responsibilities that you're going to have. And then you will find that you don't have the setbacks that you created because you now have a balanced orientation. I've learned that, I guess you could say 3 or 4 times trying to get that lesson.
Thank you for joining me for this presentation today. If you found value out of the presentation, please go below and please share your comments. We certainly appreciate that feedback. And be sure to subscribe and hit the notification icons. That way I can bring more content to you and share more to help you maximize your life. I look forward to our next presentation. Thank you so much for joining.